Hello, and welcome to demo number 10, which regards complex form number 2, building with pinch pots. So as we know from prior demos, pinch pots are essentially small bowls, but they don't always have to stay small bowls. We can actually use them to create larger sculptures and projects. So first, before we get into how we do that, I want to talk about why we use pinch pots to create large sculptures. So when you're making a project, as you've heard from prior demos, clay can never be too thick. Generally, we never want clay to be thicker than about 3/4 of an inch. There's a few reasons for that. The main reason is that if your clay is really thick, it is more likely to have air bubbles inside of it. Just statistically, more clay, more likely to have air bubbles. So in itself, that's not a problem. However, when we take that thick piece of solid clay and we put it into the kiln, there could be a lot of issues there. The reason being is, as you might remember from your science classes, when things get hot, when air gets hot, air expands. So if you have this little air bubble inside of a solid piece of clay and the air wants to expand in the heat, but it has nowhere to go, it's going to eventually crack and break your project. If it's an intense enough break, pieces of your project could go flying and hit other students' projects that could break their projects. So in order to protect your project as well as other people's projects, you want to make sure your clay is never thicker than 3/4 of an inch. Another reason we never want our clay thicker than 3/4 of an inch is if you do have a thick solid chunk of clay, the outside of it is going to dry a lot quicker than the very core, the very inside of it. So if the very core, the inside of it, is still damp by the time it goes into the kiln, that dampness is also going to cause a lot of issues with the kiln, and that could also lead your project to explode. So that's why we never want our clay to be thicker than 3/4 of an inch. So then how do we create large projects, right? How are we creating large projects if we can't have thick clay? In other words, for example, this is one of my horses I recently did. How did I make this, right? He's pretty thick. How did I make him without having thick clay? Well, as you might be able to guess, this clay is actually hollow. So there is a huge amount of air inside of this project. That way, the walls of the project are never thicker than 3/4 of an inch. So yes, there are some solid bits of clay, like these legs are solid, his mane is solid, but as you can tell, those aren't very thick. But the core of his body and his neck is all hollow. It's all with air inside of it. And the basic way we make that is by putting together pinch pots. So it might be a kind of complex way to understand it with this project, but I'm also going to show you a more straightforward way to understand it. So if you look at, this is me in the future right now. So it's kind of like a Star Wars trilogy where future me is ahead of past me. So anyhow, the remainder of this demo, you're going to see me actually creating this pumpkin that is already made. So how I made this is I took 2 pinch pots and I attached them together like this. That way there's a hollow piece of air inside and my project will not explode in the kiln. So you might be wondering, and I'll talk about this more later in the demo, you might be wondering, well, aren't you just creating a giant air bubble if you just make this whole thing hollow? Yes and no. You are making a giant air bubble, but you want to put a hole somewhere discreet in your project so that way the air has somewhere to escape from. If the air has somewhere to escape from, your project is not going to blow up in the kiln. So without further ado, I'm going to get started showing you guys how I made this project. All right, here we go. All right, so I am now going to demonstrate how to attach pinch pots to create a large hollow form. So as you see here, I've already created 2 pinch pots of relatively equal size. So I did the standard knead and wedge, roll it into a ball, put your thumb down the middle, and then pinch the wall method to create these pinch pots. So what I now need to do is I need to attach them, but there's a couple things that I need to do first. One is I want to make sure that they are going to line up well. So if I were to attach them just as is, I can see there's a huge dent there. It connects, and then whoopsie, there's another large dent there. So I need to make sure that these actually line up well, right? So why don't they line up well? Well, if you look at this one, you can tell that the lip is very uneven, right? So what I'm now going to do is I'm going to make sure that they do line up. That might also solve an issue of one having a little bit of an overbite. You can see this top one is a little bit wider than the bottom one. So by leveling off the edge, this might make it fit a little bit better, not just to make sure that the edges or the lips line up, but so that this one doesn't have too much of an overbite. So lots of different tools you can use. I'm just going to most likely stick with using this loop tool. I'll be using this flat end of it. So the trick is determining where your high points are, because the high points are the areas that you're going to be cutting off. So I know this wasn't the pinch pot that had the majority of the issues. You know, this one was mostly okay, but still, pinch pots will connect best if you have a nice flat surface. So it's okay if you have a rounded lip on your pinch pots. However, when you attach them, you definitely want a flat lip, because that way there's more surface area for the surfaces to connect on. So I flattened out this one for the most part. We'll see if that'll be good. Let me start leveling out this one. When you start leveling these out, slow and steady wins the race. If you go too quickly when you level these out, then what could happen is if you cut too deep, you're gonna run into additional challenges. So start slow, only take away a little bit, and then take off more and more. Remember, the trick is to only cut down the high points of the lip. If you shave off the low points, then you're just digging yourself into almost literally a bigger ditch. So you see I've started doing this side, and you notice how it's starting to level out. I still gotta do this side. There's lots of different tools you could use for this. Anything that can slice through the clay, quite honestly. Might have gone a little deep in that last pull, but we'll see. So how is it looking? Pretty level? It's pretty level. I'll probably just do one more go around. Yep, definitely went a little too low in that one spot. So I'll do one more go around to really try to smooth everything out. Okay, how's that looking? Much better, huh? Now let's see if these two pinch pots line up well. Pretty good, but we want to get them a little closer even. What you can do is once your pinch pot starts getting really close to being the right size, you could actually kind of tap it against the tabletop, and that should start leveling out the lip. What you want to be careful of is you want to make sure it doesn't start flattening your pinch pot. So instead of being a rounded half sphere, if you do this too much, it's going to really become a flat, almost plate-like appearance. So don't overdo this. Try to kind of brace the sides of your pinch pot to make sure that they don't start splaying out. Okay, let's see. I'd say that's pretty darn good. You don't see any gaps for the most part going around. Now the one issue is that this bottom piece, it used to be our top piece, let me flip it over. This bottom piece still has a bit of an overbite, but I think we should be good. It's still pretty close.